Hello developers, welcome to day 19 of the 30 days of JavaScript challenge. Today marks another opportunity for us to tackle challenges and deepen our understanding of JavaScript concepts. Let's dive in and make the most out of this learning journey. In today's challenge, we are supposed to execute asynchronous functions in parallel. So it says, given an array of asynchronous functions called functions, return a new promise called promise. And each function in the array should accept no arguments and return a promise. Then it continues and says that all promise should be executed in parallel. Okay, you can just continue to read the question. And it says that the return promise should only resolve, you can see the promise resolves when all the promises returned from the functions were resolved successfully in parallel. Then the resolved value of the promise should be an array of all the resolved values of promises in the same order as they are in the functions. The promise should resolve when all the asynchronous functions in the array have completed execution in parallel. So this is only under this condition is when our promise should resolve. Then the promise return should reject when any of the promises returned from the function were rejected. And it should also reject with the reason for the first rejection. And you know that if a promise rejects, it returns a message, and that is the reason for the rejection. Then it says solve it without using the built-in promise.all function. And in the previous challenge, you saw this promise.all does exactly this. So in short, you are trying to implement the promise.all without actually using the promise.all function. You're trying to write that function promise.all. Okay, so you can look at this example. So example 1 says that this functions array has only one function, and this function will resolve after 200 milliseconds. So it will resolve with 5. So you expect that the output will be just be the array of one number, that is 5. Okay, that is just straightforward. So we'll go to example 2. So example 2, there is two functions. The first function will resolve after 200 milliseconds and it will resolve with the value 1. Then the other function will reject after 100 milliseconds. So the expected promise should reject, because you have seen that it should reject if any of the promises reject. So if this one promise rejects, our new promise that will return should also reject, and she'll reject with this error that was returned from the function that rejected. So expect the output to say that it should to reject with this error like that. So okay, you can go to the last example, example 3. So example 3 takes, I think it's 4 functions. So the first function will resolve after 50 milliseconds and will resolve with 4. The second function, it ends where here it will resolve with 10 after 150 milliseconds. Then the third function will resolve with 16 after 100 milliseconds. So you can see if the functions are executed in parallel, that means that asynchronously they don't wait for each other. It means that this function 3 should be executed before function 2, because you have seen that function 2 will wait for 150 milliseconds while function 3 waits for 100 milliseconds. So this function 3 will be executed before functions 2. That is what is called in parallel. But the output should be the resolved values in the exact order as they appear in the array. So expect the result of function 2 to be the second result. So this order of the results should be same as the order that they appear in that functions array. And that is exactly what you see in this output. So yeah, that is the examples. Then the constant says that function is an array of functions that returns a promise with the length that is less than or equal to 1, and also that is greater than or equal to 1 or less than or equal to 10. So that is what we are supposed to implement. So I believe we already learned about the promise.all. So I'll just dive into the solution. To solve this challenge, I'll create a function like that. I'll call it promise_all because you are trying to mimic how the promise_all works, like that. So I told this function should take in an array of functions that is called functions. So I'll just put here functions like that. Then what this function should do, it should just return a promise. So I'll return new promise. And you know that a promise takes in a callback function. So I'll put the callback function like that. And this callback of a promise takes in the resolve and the reject parameter. So I'll say resolve and reject like that. So what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to, each function of this array, you're supposed to run that function, and if it resolves, we store the results, and if any of that function rejects, it will reject with the error. So first, I'll have to get each individual function in this array. So I have to loop through that function. So you can just use the for each or the dot map, any one that you prefer. I'll just use the map in this case. So I'll use map to loop through that array of functions. I know that this map takes in the item, index, and array. This map takes in a callback function, and that callback function of the map has these parameters item, index, and array. And in this case, we won't use the array, we only use the item and the index. And I know that this item, each item of this array is a function. So I'll just put something like fn so that I know each array is a function. Then I'll have to use the index, because you have seen in this example 3 that some functions might execute before others, because all functions are run in parallel. So in this example 3, you see this function 3, this function will execute before function 2. But we expect the result of function 2 to be stored before function 3. That's why you have to keep track of the index, so that you can store the result to the same index as the function is. So in that matter, first I'll create a variable here. I'll call let result, and this will be an array. And this is the place where I'll be storing my values that are returned if this function resolves. So I'll run this function. So to run a function, I'll just run it like that. And you're told that this function will not take any arguments. So I expect not to pass anything inside here. And you know that this function will return a promise. And to consume a promise, you can use the dot then and the dot catch. So this dot then takes in a callback function also. So I'll put here a callback function like that. Then if this function resolves, this dot then will take in the value that will resolve with that function. Then and to put this value in this array. So I'll do something like this. You might use array.push, but if you use array.push, they'll be stored. The order won't be the same as the order that this function will not be the same as the order of the functions, because you have seen that some function execute faster than others. They are not executed, they don't take the same time. And in this case, this function will be run parallelly. So it will not wait for the earlier code to execute before it executes. That's why you have to keep track of the index in which this function is. So I'll store the result like this. I'll say result that has that index of index. This is the position where I'll put the value. So this is how I'll store my values in this array. So if it is index 1, I'll store it in the same index as this function was in this array. I hope that is clear. Okay, so that is what I'll do in the then. Then I have to keep track before I have to resolve this, but before I resolve, and to be sure that all the functions have completed executing. So I can create a variable here. I'll call it count. So I'll say let count. Then this count will start at 0. Then each time this function has executed, and to increase the value of count. So I'll say count plus plus. So if the first function executed, I'll increase the value of count like that. Then after all functions have completed executing and all of them have resolved, I'll resolve with this array. So I'll put that as a condition. I'll say if the value of count is equals to the value of the original array length. So I'll say array, in this case functions dot length like that. And if it is equal, it means that all functions in this array have resolved. And if all functions have resolved, and this our new promise to resolve with this array of results. So I'll just say here resolve with that array of results like that. Then also there's a catch. So if this function has resolved, this will happen. And if it has not resolved, here I'll put a dot catch. So I'll say dot catch. So this dot catch also takes in a callback function. I can just put it like that. And if in case it has not resolved, we'll check that error it has rejected with it will catch that error, then we'll reject this new promise with that error that was returned. Reject with that error, like that. So yeah, so this is how I'll solve this challenge, but I'll just explain it again. So first, I created a function. I called it promise all, but you can just give it any name. And this function takes in an array of functions. Then this function returns a promise. This all of it is a promise. Okay. Then we know that a promise takes in a callback function, and that callback function of the promise takes in the resolve and the reject. Then here I have declared this results array, and this results array stores the values that are resolved by these functions here. So if this function resolved, the value will be stored in this array, and they'll be stored in the correct index. That's why I'm using this line, result index is equals to value. If function is index 1, the result will be stored in index 1. That is what this line 8 does. Then we know that this function is an array, so I'll loop through that array first to get each individual function and their index. Then if I run this function, you know that it will return a promise. So if it has resolved, this dot then will be run. If it has reject, this dot catch will be run. So if it has reject, if any of this function rejects, we'll just stop the execution and reject our promise with the error of that function. We'll reject with that error message that function rejected with. And if it has resolved, we'll just keep the result in this array. And if all functions have resolved, and this is the line that does that, it checks if all functions have resolved. And if all of them are resolved, is when we will resolve our new promise. If any of them are not resolved, this one will not be run. And we expect if anyone has resolved, means it has rejected. So if it has rejected, we expect this dot catch to be called, and this dot catch will just reject this promise immediately, and our executions will stop there. So I'll just test this with the example. Just try with the example 3. So I'll just copy this functions array. It's there. Just copy that. Then define it here. I'll just say const. Then I paste that. Then I'll call my promises. I'll call my promise all function. So I'll just say promise all like that. And I'll take this functions array here like that. Then know that this one will return a promise. So you can just call dot then and dot catch on it. So say dot then. So if it has resolved, we want to take the result, then we just log it so that you can see it in the console. So I'll just log the result like that. I'll remove this semicolon. Then if there's an error, I'll just catch. So I'll say dot catch. I'll catch that error. Then I just log it also. So if I save this code and run, I expect this to resolve with the array 4, 10, and 16 in this exact order. So let me run this code and confirm that. So you can see indeed my function resolved with this array 10, 4, and 10. And that is how you are expected to solve this challenge. You can also try with example 1 and 2. So that is it for this. See you in the next challenge. Peace out.